For any of you that don't know who I am, I'm Mary Pat Dutton. I'm the registrar. And the registrar's office, just by what we do, ends up knowing a lot more than we probably ever wanted to about FERPA. So that's why I'm doing this presentation. FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or as I mentioned, lovingly referred to by those of us in the business as FERPA. I suspect most of you who've been in higher education for a while have heard of FERPA before, have probably attended a session just like this where you've been told what you can and can't do. So what I thought I'd do is just to change it a little bit, is to give you some of the history of why FERPA is in existence, and then tell you what it is that FERPA actually says. Because if you remember the rights that it's giving people, that coupled with some common sense helps you not make a mistake when it comes to FERPA. FERPA is a federal law that was enacted by Congress in 1974, and then, as with most laws, it's been amended a number of times. If you're as old as I am, you may have heard FERPA referred to as the Bradley Act, and the reason for this is that it was named after the congressional sponsor, who was Bill Bradley. The essence of FERPA is to protect the education records. So that's basically what it is it's protecting education records. Under FERPA, students have 3 rights. They have the right to inspect and review their educational records. They have the right to have some control over the disclosure of information from their education records. And they have the right to seek to amend incorrect education records. So first we're going to talk about their right to inspect and review. First of all, what's an education record? It's any record maintained by the institution that contains information that's personally identifiable to a student. Now, as with anything, there's always exceptions, and these are exceptions that are not controlled by FERPA. So, under FERPA, it does not deal with things like law enforcement, medical, psychological records that are held by the institution. Now, those things are controlled by other things, like psychological and medical records are controlled under what's called HIPAA, which I know absolutely nothing about HIPAA. Don't ask me about it. I'm sure people in the counseling center would be able to tell you about HIPAA, but FERPA has nothing to do with HIPAA. It also doesn't have any hold over employment records unless the student is employed because of the fact that they're a student. So work study, student employment records, or a graduate assistant, their employment records are controlled by FERPA. The other thing is alumni records. And this is because once a student ceases to attend a school, FERPA no longer covers them. It continues to cover what they did while they were a student, but once they leave, it does not have anything to do with the student or with the alumni. And then the last thing that FERPA says is not considered an educational record are records in the sole possession of the maker of those records. Where this really comes into play is for faculty who are academic advisors. If you meet with an advisee and you take some notes about that meeting, and then you put them into that specific student's advising folder, only put things in there that you wouldn't mind if the student saw someday. So if you're going to write something about the student that's not very nice and that you wouldn't want the student to see, keep an extra folder at the back of your advising folders that's called quirky advising notes or something like that, and that type of thing in there. So if we were ever asked to provide the student with their records, you wouldn't have to provide something like that because it's in your sole possession. It's not in that student's file. The second right that students have under FERPA is the right to have some control over the disclosure of their records. So this means that they can have those records released to a third party. It's just that they need to give us prior written consent. So that's why up in the registrar's office we have a transcript request form. So if a student wants a transcript sent to another school or to a potential employer, they need to fill out and sign a request form. We also have a form that we let students know about that is, we call it a FERPA release form. And this is a blanket release that lasts until the student pulls it out. And this is for a specific person. So lots of times, I guess I should say, freshmen are encouraged to fill out and sign a FERPA release form for their parents so that their parents could see their academic records. This was a big thing back in the days when we mailed out grades at the end of the semester because, you know, it was amazing how if the grades were mailed to the students, they kind of disappeared. Gee, we never got our grades. And so then the parents would say, send them to me. Well, it's the student's right to control that. The student has to tell us who to have the grades sent to. And now with technology and things like eSpire, that's not an issue because they just go in and look at their grades. Again, there's some exceptions to this right, one of which is directory information. A school can release that without the prior written consent. This is information such as the student's name, their address, email address, their major, dates of attendance, height and weight of athletic teams. But the kicker to this is that the school has to define what directory information is, and we have to publish that. So if you look on page 33 of the current University of St. Mary catalog, you will see a paragraph that says what we consider directory information and what we can release without the student's prior consent. One of the key words there is what we can release. So if a company calls up and wants a mailing list for all of our students because they want to send out, you know, a credit card application to everybody who's 18 years old, we can say, no, we're not going to provide that. But if there was something else that we did want students to be aware of, we can provide that. FERPA does have some guidelines, well, some parameters, I guess I should say, about what a school can consider directory information. For example, USM could not say, oh, we're going to make social security numbers directory information and we're going to make those available. No, FERPA says there's a limit to what we consider directory information. Another time that we don't have to have the student's approval, prior written request, is in the case of a lawfully executed subpoena. And we do get these in the registrar's office from time to time. So there's all this that we have to go through to make sure that it is a lawfully executed subpoena. And FERPA also says that we need to attempt to contact the student, let them know we're going to release them, and then the student has the right to, you know, contact their attorney, and then they could file something saying we can't release them. So we do, we just had a situation a while ago where, I mean, it was a student who'd been here a long time ago. We had an address, but we suspected it was an old address, did some research, couldn't find anything else. We sent a letter to that student, did a, what do you call it, return receipt thing where they had to sign, somebody had to sign for it, just so that we could keep that in our files so that if anything ever came back to haunt us, we'd have that covered. And the final category where we don't need to get the student's prior written consent is in the case of a school official with legitimate educational interest. So you might ask, who is a school official and what is legitimate educational interest? FERPA defines a school official very broadly, and basically what it says is any of us who work at the University of St. Mary are considered a school official. So any of us fall under that and would be okay with that. Where the line gets drawn is that legitimate educational interest. The best way that I have to explain that is to give you a couple of examples. One would be, pick on somebody, Andrew in the development office. Let's say he has a job opening, and a person applies for that job who attended University of St. Mary 10 years ago. So Andrew comes down to the registrar's office and says, I'd like to see that person's transcript because I want to see how they did here as a student. We would have to say no to Andrew unless he had a written release form from that person, because he would be looking at that transcript not for an educational interest. He would be looking at it as a potential employee-employer relationship. And I know Andrew would never do that, so that's why I picked on him. On the other hand, if, let's say, Paul Dean in the math department had a student who was in college algebra who seemed to be struggling, and Paul couldn't figure out, do I need to move this student back to intermediate algebra or maybe math 006, or is the student just not paying attention and not, studying or anything? Paul could come over to the registrar's office and we could pull out for him the students, I'm pretending the student's a freshman, the student's ACT or SAT test scores, and he could look at how the student did on the math section of that test, and that would give him an idea of how to work with this student because of the educational interest in that situation. So that's sort of where the difference comes in with an educational interest.
I have a question on that one.
Uh-huh.
What about us in the DPT program? If we have undergrads that are interested, is that considered an educational program or educational interest?
Yes, that would be, because you're looking at it as you're going to be
accepting them for educational purposes.
Exactly.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. So the last one is the right to seek to amend incorrect education records. They have the right to inspect their education records, so that's, again, they can come to the registrar's office, ask to see their permanent file, ask to see their transcript. In fact, they can look at all that on eSpire as far as their grades go. They could also ask to see, if you're a faculty member and you're an advisor, they could ask to see their advising file. If we want to get real sticky about it, FERPA says that we have 45 days to comply with that request. It says that we can ask that the request be in writing and that we have 45 days to comply with it. Now, in reality, if a student shows up in our office and wants to see their personal file, we're going to pull it out and let them see it right then. And if we need to make copies, they may want a copy of their application or a copy of their ACT test scores, that type of thing. We're going to go ahead and give it to them after we make sure that the person that's asking really is that student. That would be the other disclaimer I'd make there. The other thing is that we do have processes in place if a student wants a correction made. Now this actually, the process we have in place, again, is for faculty, that if a student questions a grade, and that process for the most part is that the student goes to the faculty member, discusses it with them. If they really feel that it's unfair and this faculty person, the old line about he or she doesn't like me and that's why I got the bad grade, they could always go to the department head and then they can eventually go to the academic vice president. So we do have something in place that we can do that. I suspect if there was, I can't even think of an example of this, but like if they looked in their permanent file and they saw something in regard to admissions that they didn't feel was right, that they could go, then they'd work through the admissions office, possibly with one of the counselors, and then to Ken Wurzberger, and there again, then it would go to Dr. LeBeau. So there is something in place for that. So what happens if we don't comply with FERPA? They're probably not going to come and haul us away to jail in handcuffs and in a police car. But what is going to happen is that the student can file a lawsuit against the University of St. Mary, and I suppose against a specific person if there was a problem with that. There have been situations where this has been done. I believe University of Oklahoma, Washington State University, Gonzaga University are just some more current ones that I can think of that have had major lawsuits. So of course that takes a lot of money, a lot of time on the part of the school to defend ourselves in a court of law. The other thing that can happen is that if we were found in violation of FERPA, especially in a large situation, so not specifically a student, but if the registrar's office was sending out a list of currently enrolled students and including their social security number and things like that, and we sent that to the Leavenworth Times, because, you know, if we did something goofy like that, it would be the Department of Education that would come after us. And the way that what they could do is take away our federal or Title IV funding, federal funding. What that is all of the money that the college has for Pell Grants, for student loans. So basically, we would have no money other than maybe outside scholarships that could be awarded to students. So and you can see where I'm going with this, if we had no access to Title IV funds, we'd have no funding for students, we'd have no students, and so I know you've seen this picture before at another presentation, but that would be the demise of the University of St. Mary if we didn't have that. So that's how they hold FERPA over our heads. That is FERPA in a nutshell. I hope this helped. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what it is and is not okay to disclose over email? Because I'm wondering about things like, well, for example, if a student emails you and says, "Can you tell me about what my grade is right now?"
Okay.
Can you give them a range? You can't. Can you give them specifics or not? And then another example would be for like the honors class that we're going to be teaching. Is it okay to mass email students with a certain GPA, but not say what the GPA is in the email? Say you are invited to, potentially take this class because of your accomplishments. If you're general like that, is it safe, or is that not okay?
Okay. In response to your questions, my first disclaimer is going to be that there is this book on FERPA. This is my FERPA Bible, is what I call it. It has the whole law wording in it, and it has lots of examples and things like that. Anybody's welcome to come up to my office. You can sit down and look through it. You can borrow it or whatever. The second part of that disclaimer is that, as with any law, it's like, you read part of it here and you think you get it, and you read 2 pages further and it appears that they're totally contradicting what you thought you understood before. So just warn you about that. On the other hand, I've been in this business for a long, long time, so I've sort of seen lots of things. So some of it's my experience that I'm talking about. So the first part of your question was a student emailing you.
Yeah, you want to know their grade, and can you tell them over email?
Okay. Again, that's a gray line, because you're actually supposed to have, well, you're giving it to the student.
Right.
So I guess my thought is, as long as you're sure that's who you're giving it to. So if they email you from a Yahoo account and want it, I would not respond to that and do that. In fact, I think I would probably start a new email, send it to their University of St. Mary address, or even before that, I'd say, stop by my office, or catch me after class and we'll walk to my office. You know, there again, it's that gray area. I would also be very careful about sending out a mass email to students about that. Is there other criteria?
Well, it's kind of vague, that's part of the problem.
Problem, yeah.
What about with a blind CC?
You can do the blind CC, that solves a lot of things. Because anytime, even if you don't spell out the criteria that says you have to have a 3.5 cumulative grade point average, students are real smart. They're going to figure that out. It's like, I don't know if any of you can remember this, but you know, in maybe first or second grade where they put the reading class into the bluebird group and the robin group and the whatever hummingbird group. Well, it didn't take you but about 5 minutes to realize that this was the slow reader group and the advanced reading group. So students will figure that out too. So that's John.
What advice do you have in terms of the use of social media and staying FERPA compliant, just in terms of, can faculty members say anything about their classes in a social media venue, and just what kind of warnings or what kind of advice do you have on that?
Okay, and again, I mean, FERPA hasn't come out with anything specific about that. Again, my thought would be common sense. You know, faculty shouldn't probably put out on Facebook that everybody flunked the class, you know, in human anatomy, or, you know, this is the dumbest human anatomy class I've ever had, as far as putting something out there that says, this human anatomy class is awesome, yesterday we dissected fetal pigs, or something like that, then that's fine. If any of you have questions that you don't want to ask in this forum, shoot me an email, give me a call. Like I said, you're more than welcome to read the FERPA Bible if you ever want some bedtime reading or something. So, okay. Pat.
How do you know if a student has signed that paper that releases is there somewhere in Zanzibar that has a question, or a little check mark that says that they signed this paperwork so we get information to the parents, or do we have to ask you guys, or how is that?
At this point, you have to give us a call, and we keep these hard copy releases in a great big old binder, and we have to look it up. Part of the reason that we keep the hard copy is because of needing the signature, and at this point everybody not having capability to do a digital signature, and that hasn't even been addressed as to specifically if that's good enough. In our Zanzibar EX system, there is a box that says FERPA restricted, and then it's a checkbox. Well, the problem is that it's the opposite of what it needs to be. It should be FERPA release, and then we could check it. The problem is that that's also, those FERPA releases that we have are person specific. So a student may release it that their mother, Mary Pat Dutton, has access. So, and you wouldn't know who it is that have access. So, you know, dad calls, well, maybe dad doesn't have permission, only mom does. So at this point, you gotta give one of us a call and we'll look it up for you. Thank you though, very much.